One of the best things about games nowadays is the emphasis on the story. Look, I'm a dreamer. I have a huge imagination, and it is nice to see the emphasis put on more story-based experiences. Granted, a game doesn't have to have a story to be good, but a wondrous plot goes a long way to make me want to play through an epic adventure. So, like my top 15 gameplay games of the year list, this list will focus on the story elements of games that I played that came out in 2017. Note that I had to play them, so if I didn't play the game, it's not going on this list. And yes, it took a while for me to make this list because I wanted to catch up on experiences that I wasn't able to the first time around in 2017. One other note though, for my list, I will also be publishing where it ranks in my entire Game of the Year list. I didn't want to make one list because, to be frank, this year had so many good games. So on top of the number in the corner for the story-based list, you'll see this number in this corner that will represent where it lies on my Game of the Year list. Now, here's the thing. For the ones that didn't make the story list, well, I sort of have to list them all right now. Here you go. I'll leave it there for a second or two. But anyway, without further ado, these are my top 15 story games of 2017. Number 15. Subsurface Circular. Starting with your typical sci-fi story with a little bit of a twist, Subsurface Circular has plot elements of stories that you've seen before, but that doesn't mean that this story isn't worth listening to. On the contrary, playing from a robot's perspective who's been assigned a detective-like role and playing with the themes of human behavior versus robotic rights and the work that's been assigned to them still works well here. The fact that you never leave a train throughout the entire experience and only talk to people that come and sit next to you may sound boring at first, but the vast personalities that you'll meet in all these robots you'll talk to more than make up for it. One of the themes of this list that you'll pick up on right away is that I'm drawn to stories where I have to try to fill in the blanks, or there's a bit of intrigue involved. Subsurface is no different there. You've got to figure out what's rumor and what's truth, and there's this big question on whether or not what you're investigating is actually a problem, or just inside your head. Is there a conspiracy going on? In addition, the topics it tackles while doing that, with prejudice and racism, are good. Not great, but good. And when the game decides to bring out more unique characters, like the priest or the athlete, the writing kicks itself up a notch and gets me more interested. Now, it doesn't really soar to great heights, and only makes number 15 on the list, thanks to the fact that in the end, it's not really unique in any one way. It's competent, but it also, in my eyes, doesn't really take chances with the materials here, and I felt like at points in the story, it really should have. It does, however, make up for it a little bit in pacing, keeping the main story in 2 hours, but unveiling the mystery at a good pace. You get enough to keep you want to keep listening to the story, without overburdening you with exposition or flooding you in possible scenarios. Finally, fans of Mike Bithel's work will like one sequence in particular, and for those who have played the game, you know the one. It's a solid sci-fi story that can end up being a good palate cleanser in between other games, while still being enjoyable. That's enough to get it on the list at number 15. Number 14. Hand of Fate 2. This is probably the first surprise of this list. Hand of Fate 2 is known for its card game mixed with Dungeons and Dragons almost, and it's not entirely known for its epic story with twists, turns, and interesting characters. But here's the thing about storytelling. There's more than one way to skin a cat, and thus there's more than one way to be effective in telling a story. And when the story is as tied to your choices as they are in Hand of Fate 2, it'll feel like you've got your own dungeon master telling a tale personally for you. Each of the missions tell a micro tale of this world, Whether it be escaping a deadly assassin who has you marked for death, or attempting to help a simple potato farmer find his love and what happened to her. Each card and encounter tells an even smaller story, which is customized depending on how you construct your deck. But what's surprising here is that regardless of your deck's construction, the story ends up working from start to finish. You can see it happening, and it doesn't feel like a conjoined mess. It feels like it flows naturally. The scenarios are also fun romps as well, hitting a wide gambit of humor and scenarios. Trying to figure out who the assassin of someone you're trying to protect brings good mystery writing, while you may get a more horror element with other parts of other scenarios. It's all done in this pseudo-realistic writing style for a fantasy world. These characters are not just NPCs that are here to help you. They have their own lives and their own wants, which makes your quest feel like a part of this world as opposed to the most important thing in this world. It's all tied together with the dealer, dropping in his own commentary and helping to add a pseudo-meta part of the experience. His quirky charms and little digs at you really help sell the game in the long run. Finally, one of the best additions to the series, the companions, all have side stories that are worth following and completing. That was one of the weaknesses of the first game, that you didn't really have anyone else to sort of connect to other than the dealer. MacLeod in particular is someone I'd recommend doing the whole series for, because he's really fascinating on the arc that he goes through. Overall, this story is one you'll take in chunks at a time with the gameplay in question and keep coming back to. Granted, the overall arc has some weaknesses due to the format, but it's not enough to drag the game down out of the top 15. A good overall solid game on all fronts. Number 13. The Sexy Brutale. If you've been following the channel for a bit now, you know that I will go out of my way to find a good murder mystery game. And so hearing about the Sexy Brutale, where there's a Groundhog Day mechanic on top of discovering the mysteries of a mansion and all these murders, I was sold. And while it may not be as story focused as I hoped when I first heard about it, it's the intrigue of what the game's location and what it doesn't necessarily tell you straight up that brings the game onto this list, because your imagination is able to fill in the blanks. The basic concept of playing days over again to try to prevent deaths may be a simple one, but it's your interaction with this world that helps make things interesting. Watching and listening behind doors and piecing together the paths of each of the characters makes you feel like you're the storyteller, putting together what you want to look at and who you want to follow while you try to prevent the next murder. Sure, you never get that much time getting to know these characters, and even the main protagonist himself, yet you still want to see what happens to them thanks to the intrigue around the mansion that you are in. And the location is the heart of this story. You'll wonder what exactly this place was built for. How did a casino with bedrooms end up attracting this cast of characters? Why is there a theater in the middle of it? What is the story behind all these instruments? Why is there a blood ghost following me around trying to intervene in my life? Now, where the game stumbles for me specifically is that it leaves too little character development on the table. Sure, you could piece some of the characters' traits and get to know a tiny bit about them by following them around, but I feel a lead-in sequence to establish the characters and their personalities would have done the game wonders. What takes the Sexy Brutale to number 13 on the list, however, is the symbiotic relationship between the game's setting and story with its presentation. The visual presentation ends up being the heart of the game, with neon lights drawing your eyes to certain locations, while the overly festive design ends up working well to contrast the murderous tone that the game presents. Its style transfers over to even the kills, which aren't necessarily the most visually stunning, but work thanks to feeling completely submerged in the game's tone. This is the quintessential mystery game, one that wants you to ask questions and to fill in the blanks with your imagination. Granted, if you do pick up the game, I highly recommend you complete it with all the invitations and the collectible cards to get the alternate ending, because I think it goes a long way to help the game's story get fleshed out. But if you are a dreamer, the Sexy Brutale is a game that you'll need to pick up, because flashy imagination is what it does the best. Number 12. Bury Me, My Love. When attempting to create this list, I went out of my way to search for mobile game story experiences, because they aren't that typical in the market nowadays, and I sort of wanted to see what the best had to offer. During my research, I came across this story about refugees in Syria attempting to make their way out of the war-torn country, an experience that attempts to be surprisingly real. The presentation of an instant messenger app is unique than other games I've played before, taking a minute or two to allow you to talk to Noor and then sleeping for a time. This is meant to simulate real-life conversations before resuming action via a notification, like you got a text message from your best friend. And for those who want to play this game in one sitting, you can do that with an option. But let's be clear, the notification method makes it feel real, and that's what this game is going for: realism. Sprinkling in facts about the chaos that refugees go through, this grounded story about how you run into untrustworthy smugglers, have to deal with counterfeit ponchos, and the simple reality of how getting yourself across a border to get yourself to safety is not only not easy, but it could be a roller coaster of emotions for everyone involved. But these emotions are grounded in reality. They're not trying to be a wondrous tale about the struggles of a single refugee fighting up a mountain and weathering death to get to another country. No, expect conversations to happen about if she's got the right gear, or whether or not to go see another smuggler than the original plan suggested. Sure, the interaction with you is limited to a couple of choices via a visual novel type experience, but you'll care about these partners. You'll feel their anxiety, their fears, their hope. And the game will stay with you for a bit, especially if you know anyone who has escaped a chaotic country. Because the game doesn't try to be too over the top, it immediately makes you think, wait, is this how it truly is? And hell, it made me go and research more about what's going on in Syria. The one thing that I will also say is that it gets a message out about what refugees go through without being overly preachy about it, which actually really helps the game's story work off its simple writing strength. The characters aren't refugees first. They are characters that are individuals and have their own personalities. This helps you connect with them and feel their decisions without the overcomplication or tugging at your emotional strings just for the sake of tugging at them. Now, it doesn't really have any gameplay of sorts. You are really just a passenger for this ride, but it's a ride that I'd recommend nonetheless, as you could take it little by little, even if you're just out and about. Give it a download and see what you think. Number 11. Pyre. Okay, I know. I said in my first video that I didn't play this game. I know. But when looking for stories that I might have missed for this video, this game surprisingly showed up on that list, which was interesting to me. On one hand, it's a sports-like game that doesn't scream story-based experience. But on the other hand, this is Supergiant Games behind it, and with Bastion and Transistor both having fantastic story experiences, it sort of means that, yeah, this could have a wonderful story. So does Pyre work as a story? Of course, that's why it's on the list. To be frank, however, the game actually starts off rather slowly story-wise, as it can be easy to get really bogged down in all the exposition that the game throws at you, having you hover over keywords to learn what they truly mean. In fact, it's so hard to get into, you can miss key parts of info that you'll need later on. And the idea of banishment and the way this world is set up may be interesting, but you can't help but be a little bit bored in the early going, especially as you don't necessarily get a good overview of the world. Now you're probably saying to yourself, Dragnix, that doesn't sound like a good story. What are you on about? Well, what balances it out, and the reason why Pyre is on the list, is the characters. The wide cast of people that you meet and how they interact with you, their own dreams and ambitions, make them feel not like NPCs or just there for show, but real people with real wants and dreams. I immediately fell in love with characters like Jodorel, the semi-demon veteran, who has a mothering side and is an interesting druid-like nature to her. Then you get characters like Sir Gilman, the snake, who just really wants to be a knight. All of their supposed crimes and their personalities really hit a great variety, and yet makes me want to see more of them. This then makes the decisions you have to make within the story, where you may lose or gain a teammate, heart-twisting. But they work well in the story's context, and makes each character feel like their own being, as opposed to revolving around you. You could love a particular character, and you may have to let them go at some point if their story seems to be just ending at the right time. You sorta want to save them, like they're your children of sorts. And the fact that the game can allow you to still fail at those moments and deal with the crushing defeat of not saving your friend, that can weigh on you. It's emotional, and it's what you come to expect out of Supergiant games. Now, if they could continue this world in an RPG setting, that would be lovely. Don't leave me hanging, Supergiant games. Number 10. DokiDoki Literature Club. I'm going to be frank here. Those saying that DokiDoki Literature Club has never been seen before and completely revitalizes the visual novel genre are only like a third right. Anyone on this channel should know that if you're looking for twists and dramatic turns in the romantic visual novel genre, there are plenty of experiences out there, and several of them are even more disturbing than what the free visual novel has to offer. Games like Enigma, for example. But with that said, it has given that genre a whole new set of eyes on that style of product due to how streamers and YouTubers have attached themselves to the design characters that weave their strengths and their hidden attributes well in the story that's being told. And note how I say well into the story, as some of the attributes are pretty in your face, but there's a reason for that. Each of the romantic options here have typical archetypes with slight twists, which actually helps ground the characters a bit more. Well, some of them at least. But what DokiDoki Literature Club does well, in my opinion, are those hints. Those events that will mess with your head, that are foreshadowed very well, both subtly and straight to your face. The poetry aspect in particular does a very good job on both sides of the story, whether it be the girls' poems themselves, or your selections of key words for your poem. As things move along in the story, you get more and more on edge, wondering where the rabbit hole goes, but more importantly, not feeling like the game is just screwing with you to get that WTF reaction, but actually working its way into it. It helps that all the girls have some appealing aspect to their personality as well. There may be a best girl, which is Yuri by the way, but none of them make you not want to see what their arcs have to offer per se. As to the descent into madness that the game takes you on, I'm actually going to go against my colleagues and say that indicating that there's a descent into madness does not take away from the game that greatly. No specifics, of course, but it's because of the pacing of that descent why that's not so important. Sure, there are shocking moments in the game, but the game does brace you well for them within the story. It doesn't swerve necessarily into them. It plants its seeds very carefully, and if you don't see them coming, that's your own damn fault. The biggest boon of the game is actually that it's free, so there's only the risk of time in which a player has to sacrifice in order to play it. Considering the down-to-earth yet uneasy writing that the game puts forward, combined with the waifus that have realistic elements to them, and it's a game that you should try if you have any curiosity about. And if you don't, well, the girls may not be so happy with you. And that may be the biggest mistake of them all. Number 9. Gravity Rush 2. Cat's second adventure is surprisingly grounded in human interaction, despite the fact that you fly in the air with the greatest of ease. And while the first game was your basic superhero story, Gravity Rush 2 decided to up the ante this time with more wide-reaching themes of social classism, what it means to be human, and the struggles of being looked up and being a hero. In addition, the dynamic of Cat's interaction with key players in the story is as solid as ever, as returning characters like Raven provide good back and forths. In fact, Raven's one of the best side characters that you'll want to know more and more about as the story goes along. I do need to mention the side characters overall, as many of them, including the villains, make a great impact on the story. What Gravity Rush 2 does well with them is fits them as puzzle pieces into the story, while not dragging the themes down to do it. Hero characters get involved at the right times based on their personalities, not because they're a hero for the sake of being a hero. The villains are justified in their actions, and yet you could still say that there's something inherently wrong in their assessments of the overall situation. They all help to shape Cat and her story, and this is how you focus on one character without them dominating the limelight. They help to serve her. Honestly, this is one of these worlds where I would love to see an animated series like they did with the pre-release video for the game. There's a real fun world to look at here, and you could have a lot of fun with it. In addition, games that are usually overall positive on all aspects don't usually do well with me, as I'm more cynical and more realistic than others in my analysis for reviews. But the positivity works well here due to Cat, and the way she bounces back from negative events without losing the effect that they could have on her. The writing here is fantastic, because it would be very easy to pull a modern day bad Superman story out of them, where the events and carnage caused don't incorporate well into the main character's reactions, and that they are still happy and seemingly not affected. Cat here is still bubbly, she's still passionate, but you can easily tell when she's screwed up by what's going on. So you're probably wondering, after I said all that, why isn't the game higher on this list? Well, to be frank, the third act. The first two acts are amazing, and I wish the game kept the tone of them, but the third act sorta goes into left field for no good reason. And well, I feel like this story wasn't really fitting of everything else before this in the third act. It loses a lot of its strength at that point, and even though the first two acts are strong enough by themselves, it ends up knocking Gravity Rush 2 down to number 10 on this list. It's a shame that we'll probably never see Cat again in her current form, considering that Gravity Rush 2 didn't exactly do well and get the attention that it probably deserved. I mean, it made both my gameplay and my story-based list this year, and while lower on both lists, it still made both lists in a year where there were a ton of great experiences. But if you're looking for a game to take a chance on, one that you've been curious on but have always been a little concerned if you'd like, Gravity Rush 2 is definitely one that I would recommend to take a shot in the dark in. Because, well, you'll get something you probably haven't seen before, and you'll like it. Number 8. What Remains of Edith Finch. Sometimes a story doesn't have to be an intricate series of plot threads that all weave together in some fabulous series of connections. Sometimes it can only be one common thread that holds them together. While the small stories contained within What Remains of Edith Finch is the family tree that connects all the vignettes of the Finch family, it's the unique presentation in each story that places the game on this list. It is a short series of stories that range from a horror icon stuck home on a fateful night to a man living out his days in a bunker. However, it's more than that. Each of the short tales of the family member's life are amazing on how much information and feeling you can get out of them in the limited time frame. You immediately get impressions on how the character sees the world and what exactly kind of character they are, even without that much spoken dialogue at times. It does help that going into it, each of the family members' rooms are filled with so much life and character, giving you a glimpse of their loves and desires. In fact, the whole house tells a story within itself with its hidden passageways, and just sort of the way it looms over you, almost watching your every move, like it's alive or something. Connecting with the characters is easy, but not oppressing to the point where you don't want to continue. In addition, pacing was perfect for the shorter experience, unraveling the mystery slowly but surely, but keeping your attention in the 2 hours that it takes to play. Each small action you have to perform helps immerse you in the world, using unique tools in each story that sell the character and their personality. Granted, it doesn't make it higher on this list for one reason. It's a short experience. But to me, it's also the right length for the story being told here. I see a lot of comparisons to Gone Home with the game, but frankly, I think it sort of blows that out of the water. I never really wanted to learn more about Gone Home's story. Here, I did. And that's the difference, that I wanted to see more. Hopefully we will see more in the future. Number 7. Night in the Woods. Fascism, cute animals, and high school drama. Okay, maybe Night in the Woods is a little bit unconventional in its storytelling, and its looks may not necessarily match the art style it presents with. But hell, that's Night in the Woods in a nutshell. Unconventional. Which is weird when I think about it, because this story is grounded in real life a lot. In fact, if you have any sort of depression or had troubles in high school, Night in the Woods may really help you deal with your past. And frankly, it's a game I'd recommend anyone to play just for how different it ends up feeling. You might have noticed that many of the different games up to this point have had different strengths of their storytelling. Well, Nights in the Woods is no different, and it's a weird one. It's hard to describe, but the way that the storytelling is done here, it feels modern. The made-up lingo the characters use, the use of Messenger on the laptop, and everything in the world just has this hip vibe to it. Characters used phrases that are over-the-top wordy for the sake of it. I don't want to say it's down to earth, because I don't think that's necessarily the case, but I guess I'd call it hip. I mean, it's really strange all around how this game succeeds. The main character, May, is really unlikable. She's obviously gone through things at the start of the story, but the way that she acts around characters at times can really put you off. Most of these characters are damaged in some way, but the way May acts at times goes beyond damage and feels almost sadistic at times. She's not an anti-hero either. She's this weird collection of quirks that, to be honest with you, really shouldn't work together. And yet they do. It casts a wide net of characters that you'll find something to relate to, and the way the story is constructed, it almost molds itself to your vision more than a lot of games I've played ever have for me. Whether it be the friendships you focus on, the coming-of-age tale for these characters, or the small-time vibe that's slightly changing yet standing still at the same time, you'll find something to keep you going until the game gets to the meat of its main story. And with the hint of supernatural themes as well, you'll want to see where this rabbit hole goes to in the end. Regardless, the main star of the story, however, is May's main friendship with her 3 friends, and you'll want to play the game repeatedly to get the full story on all of them. Her friendship with Bae and the conflict that arises between them is a fantastic sub-story that really sort of pulls at the heartstrings. There is a lot of friction, and yet you feel for Bae, and really you don't feel for May at all, but it helps you grow as a character and realize that May may be more narrow-minded than she thought. Now, is it the best story that I've read this year? Not at all. And the thing is that while there are some elements that do really work here, there are some weaknesses, especially in the first act and getting to the main plot of the story. However, I'll leave with this. Sam, you asked me to play this game, and I appreciate you asking me to play the game because I do think it's good enough for number 7 on this list. With that said, it's no Valhalla. And I'm pretty sure we made a promise that if I played Night in the Woods, you would play Valhalla. So it's now time for you to come up with your end of the bargain. Number 6. Hellblade: Senua's Sacrifice. I'm a sucker for stories that dive into psychological trauma, or anything that hits really hard and difficult topics. So hearing that Hellblade handles the topic of psychosis and mental illness in general, that was intriguing. I would have loved to cover it at the time it came out, but hey, things happen when you juggle a job and a YouTube channel. Well, I recently took the time to try the game from Ninja Theory, and almost immediately went, yep, it's going on the story list. It didn't take long for Hellblade to establish a creepy atmosphere dripped in Norse mythology. Following Senua as she makes her way to rescue her lover's soul from the depths of literal hell itself, you begin to question what is inside her head and what's actually supernatural in this frightening tale. It's the little things that make this narrative work. The voices which comment on her journey as she moves towards the objective act as a narrative backstory that's actively being told. They feel oppressing, but act as an audience to comment on what's going on. Then it seemingly connects the Norse mythology element at every turn. And let me be honest here, I'm a sucker for mythology. Like, throw it into a game, and I'm already probably loving it. But here, it's woven in well into the nightmares that Senua has to face, giving them actual teeth with things such as ash and soot that make you feel dirty just looking at it. The game's metaphor game is off the charts, and each unique situation and trial that Senua has to go through never makes you feel comfortable. What Hellblade gets right is its atmosphere. I never felt safe in Hellblade, even after a couple of hours. Going into an area filled me with anxiety, as I didn't know what the game would throw at me next, and it was scary as all hell thanks to the story and the setup of the presentation. In fact, the presentation enhances the feeling so much, with the visuals doing well to make an oppressive world. But sound. Sound is the key to this game working so well on a storytelling perspective. The main performance by Senua sells this perfectly, as the actress does a fantastic job of selling the chaos and the insanity that she has to go through. Your skin will crawl. You'll feel like you're going insane yourself. And I love this game for that. You might argue that you could put that idea in the gameplay or presentation category, but this all works due to the narrative that Ninja Theory created here. Everything enhances that. Your imagination and your feelings run wild with the way the game pokes at your fears and your concerns, and it can end up being a story very unique to you if you have troubles of your own past. The fact that they got a medical professional involved should tell you enough about how effective this storytelling can be on a mental health level. If there was one game on this list that I hate that I didn't cover at the time of its release, it's Hellblade, because it's worth every penny of its asking price, and I haven't even made it through the entire game. That should tell you something. Number 5. Divinity Original Sin 2. Like I said in the gameplay equivalent of this list, Divinity Original Sin 2 might have made it higher on this list if I spent more time with it. And that's saying something right now, considering that I have 56 hours in the game. Once again, I'd like to thank my partner in crime, Mermaid Illustration, aka Andrea, for playing through the game with me. And while I'd say the gameplay is a masterpiece of RPG brilliance, the story doesn't balance it out. It takes the game to even greater heights, and it's why in the end, it ends up being my runner-up game of the year. And given more time, it could have been my game of the year if I put more time into it. The story behind the Godwoken, a set of heroes that are specifically chosen who also contain the source, seems to be your typical chosen hero story set in a fantasy world. But man, the way the game presents its dark tones from the get-go makes things feel so refreshing to me. There are dark themes in a lot of games, of course, but they don't necessarily dive that deep into them, almost keeping them like a side dish. Here, that dark element is woven straightly into the main plot. Executions, exploitation, thievery, and just general badness. It also does this without taking a side per se. Each faction in the world does have good reasons to fight their own fight, and while their values may differ from faction to faction, they all think they are doing the right thing and are justified for doing it. This sets a stage of a series of main and minor characters that are fun to follow and hit a wide gambit of personalities. The main characters in particular are a great set, as while we've been focusing on Sabeel and Ifin in our run, all of them have unique elements that draw you to them. What's really interesting about Divinity's writing is how the humorous sections don't actually drag the game down at any point, despite the fact that the game is a real dark tale of fantasy. Talking to skulls on a stick, telling me not to open up a treasure, and the comedy that ensues got to me. The crab that believes it's an almighty magician, and may actually be, and you just don't know it. You think that these sections would hurt the overall tone of the game, but the writing is so clever that you can't help but enjoy everything about them. You go out of your way to find the magical rooster that could help your problem. You wonder if you could have talked your way out of a situation and made a new friend as opposed to slaughtering them. The choices here are the best part of the game, as you feel so connected to the story when your silver tongue gets you out of a situation. One of the best decisions that was made here was voice acting everything to enhance your narrative experience. Each small NPC that you barely get to know have unique voices to them, ones that make them able to be distinguished out of a crowd. And I cannot believe how many of these voices work to give incredible performances to give these characters life. You'd think by sheer numbers that wasn't possible, but down to the smallest NPC, it works. It works so well. Divinity Original Sin 2 is the RPG water cooler game. The one where you tell stories to your friends about how you found this side quest, how you handled a particular area, and the story that was created just for you. You can't help but share it and want to talk about it more. And while the gameplay is a huge part of that, it's the story and how different it can be, even to the smallest point, that makes this succeed without sacrificing quality. It's the runner-up game of the year for a reason. And to be honest, it still could be the game of the year when I'm finally finished with it. It's that damn good. Pick it up. Now. Number 4. Finding Paradise. Look, it's easy to think that the entire series by Freebird Games can be summed up with a box of tissues. And let's be clear about that. If you find yourself not feeling anything after playing games such as To the Moon and A Bird Story, you probably don't have a soul. But with that said, it's very easy to overlook how well Ken Gao sets up his characters and plot lines, and there's no better example of that than his latest story about granting a wish of a dying man in Finding Paradise. Colin's story about a man with seemingly a wonderful life having to call the Sigmund Corporation to help fulfill his wish in his dying days is an interesting one, changing several of the key themes from the original To the Moon experience, but causing a lot of intrigue in the meanwhile. Compelling down-to-earth characters take center stage here, which helps for a solid framework to piece together Colin's memories little by little. Whether it's the mysterious Fae seemingly dropping out of his life out of nowhere, or this book with no words that Colin keeps around, you'll want to see where this plot flies to, and what the truth behind all these questions you have are. This then sets up a final act that is a rush of emotional punches of all flavors, as each plot thread has a great payoff for the 6 hours it'll take to get through the story. When that final song plays, you'll most likely be in tears, as the game has dug into your brain and has pulled your heartstrings so effectively. It helps that the game balances the emotional moments with some really good humor as well, allowing you to put the moments into reasonable context and help sell them a bit more. In fact, there's no real weaknesses in the story either, keeping a great pace throughout the gameplay. The most overlooked element of the game is the Sigmund employees Rosaline and Watts, and their commentary about Colin's life and their own jobs. They realize that granting these wishes aren't exactly easy on anyone, and they use their thoughts to help reflect on the game's events and make you consider perspectives that you may have never thought of. They are two completely opposite characters, but they both care in different ways, and are essential in keeping the story intact. It's a story that I'll recommend to everyone, and the only reason that it doesn't make it higher on this list is that it really went up against stiff competition this year. That's all. But that doesn't mean avoid it, because you'd be making a huge mistake if you did. Number 3. Nier Automata. Yoko Taro is an insane genius. I mean, just look at his Drakengard series and what insanity that series has to offer, and you'll know that something seems a little bit different up in his cranium. Nier Automata is actually more grounded than some of his past works, but that's not saying much. Regardless, the writing and story is not only fantastic here, but captivating. The real stars of this story are 2B and 9S, two androids attempting to protect the remaining pockets of humanity as part of the Yorha initiative. The dynamic between the pair works well, with the stoic and guarded 2B countering the more upbeat and curious 9S. Them growing as a pair, working as a team, and rubbing off on each other as they go through the various missions is fantastic. Working well to complement each other, and working off the main themes of what it means to be human in this universe. Great foreshadowing and symbolism, combined with elements of the presentation in a huge way. And understanding each smaller element of the plot helps really sink in how deep and connected this writing is. And it's the kind of game you can just sit around and just think about all it has to say, and not even play the game to get some enjoyment out of it. There's so many subplots here I found myself drawn to in this game, and while I knew that all of them wouldn't be fully fleshed out, I can't think of one that disappointed me in the end. The robots in the game and Pascal's village attempting to mimic human-like tendencies was fascinating. Even the smallest side quests really add a lot to the plot, like returning a robot that asks on flustered 9S how to make children. Sure, it's a hilarious moment and all that had me reeling over laughing, but it did it while adding to 9S's character. It's those very little moments of growth in the game, like 2B finally using a nickname for 9S, that give it its heart, that give it its character. Of course, people will talk about the fantastic ending, which I will admit does wrap the game up in a nice little bow without forcing an undeserved ending on these characters. But a lot of the reviews I've seen don't talk about how well the pacing was up to that point, how it worked its way to the climax in a fantastic, long experience, and specifically long. Pacing for an action game like this with these kind of messages can be really tricky to do, as a lot of players will want to get back to the fighting and the explosions right away. See Metal Gear Solid 4. In my mind, I see moments like the backstory of the red-dressed robot getting cut in most studios' AAA titles, saying it wasn't really necessary for the game. But give credit to Square Enix to allow Taro to tell his tale the way he wanted it to. One that takes the backstory of the Nier franchise and tells a new tale that's still insane, still fun, but still fantastic. I still feel a little sorry for Taro, however, because in any other year, I feel like Automata would have been a Game of the Year, if not a top 3 Game of the Year contender in most outlets. And hell, it takes my number 4 on my list of Game of the Year overall, almost taking number 3 in the process. But that's sort of his work in a nutshell, isn't it? Always overlooked, down to the Drakengard series. But I'm here to say this. Thank you, Yoko Taro. Thank you for your wonderful game and your commitment to this industry. With stories like Nier Automata, we're much better off than you not being in it. Number 2. Danganronpa V3 Killing Harmony. This was a tough one. This and the number 1 game both have stories that I adore. And to be honest with you, for a long time, V3 Killing Harmony was the number 1 game on this list. Hell, if I was really honest about it, it's 1B to the 1A of the number 1 game. But when it came down to it, one thing separated them, and Danganronpa V3 came up just short. But number 2? That's pretty good. The basic formula of the series hasn't changed here. A bunch of the ultimate high school students are locked in a deadly game of death thanks to the villainous Monokuma, as they have to make choices of possibly killing all of their classmates to escape and earn their freedom from his game. But right off the bat, the game does a lot better in the character department compared to the first game, and compared to the second game as well. Almost every single character, even the ones who die first, have a wide set of personalities that you want to learn more about. Now, what I specifically mean here is that each character has an arc that you will want to see to the end, and all of them will stand out, better than any other game in the series. Yes, this is another shot at Yasuhiro, but I digress. From Maki's mysterious babysitting job, despite hating kids, to the lovable Gonta as the big muscular man with the heart of gold, I actually wasn't looking forward to each death, because, well, all these characters deserve to live, even the ones that you would consider a little bit evil per se. But that's the point. In order for you to feel the deaths of these characters, you have to get attached to them, and DRV3 is a master fisherman in that sense. Whether it be a character's pure love for another, or the eccentric nature of an insane inventor, there's reasons to get attached to these characters, and reasons to hate when they die. And while a typical formula is followed with each of the cases, some of them you really won't see coming. There are 2, if not 3, of the best cases in this series here in impact and emotional toil, which is huge considering that both of the first games are some of my favorite visual novels. This series has always been about hope versus despair a lot of the time, but the new twists of lies versus the truth, and how sometimes one is better than the other, and vice versa, actually makes you go back and think about past games, and how you could apply the themes to those scenarios. I also have to give Spike Chunsoft a lot of credit for keeping me on my toes despite playing a lot of the games like this in the series. It uses past games to set you up for new twists, or reoccurring twists in a way that you may not have seen before. It's strange, because there is a formula for the cases if you actually sit down and look at the series as a whole, but it's an unconventional formula. Sure, I saw 1 or 2 cases coming thanks to their brilliant foreshadowing, but be aware their foreshadowing is done masterfully to foreshadow things that it may not seem like they foreshadow. They don't outright lie to you per se, but they definitely misdirect you, and misdirect you hard. And I want to talk about the ending without spoiling it here, because this is the most controversial element about Danganronpa V3. To be frank, I don't see what's so controversial about it when you dive deep into the lore and what the game has presented you. Some people say it's ruined the series, and on the contrary, I think it's enhanced it incredibly. There's so much symbolism past the surface here, that even a minor character's name, one that may feel like it was a throwaway sentence, has connections here that you can get really excited about. It was my predicted game of the year going into 2017. And because it's this year of all years, it comes in at 3rd overall. But rest assured, Danganronpa is as good as ever. And I hope the series continues, because there's nothing else like it out there. Number 1, and my game of the year, Persona 5. Many of you were probably expecting this entry lower on the list. I mean, the basic story premise is one that's been done before. Rebellion, personal freedom, and the effects of freedom versus society. We've seen it before. And hell, some may call Persona's story unoriginal at times. But just because a story is somewhat familiar, doesn't mean it's bad. On the contrary, if the writing is fantastic and the characters are all interesting, then there's no limit on how well a story can go. And believe me, that's Persona 5's strength. The characters, the subplots, and how everything fits into one tight bow in the end. The main story of the Phantom Thieves and how they came to starts off strong, dealing with the vile Komashita, and how the mechanic of a person's palace and how it represents a person's true self sets up a world of intrigue. Joker as a protagonist actually works rather well to insert you as a character without him being forgotten, with his natural look and charisma just playing well to be inserted into that role. But what's a main character without a great crew? With everyone from the strict Makoto, who's trying to open up but has a vicious side to her, to the soft-spoken Haru, who's fierce under the surface once you pull it out of her. The ragtag team hits a lot of the spectrum, but one of the reasons I love this group's dynamic is that they aren't just bonded by the task of a common goal, but they are people who end up becoming friends and caring about each other outside the realms of the task. It also helps that these characters are inherently flawed, having personality traits actually stay throughout the story and not coming up in a matter of convenience. I know I hit on Ryuji being the whipping boy in my review, but on further investigation, he's not the only one who shows his weakness constantly. You could see these characters failing, which means their triumphs will be that much better. Actually, pretty much all the characters here are great. The villains are nasty, vile, and feel justified in their acts in the right way. The confidants and how you grow with them, such as Tei, who uses you as a guinea pig for her experiments, but has a heart of gold underneath her exterior. Then there's Ichiko, who's tracing down leads left and right, and trying to find the truth of a certain event in her past. You'll curse the calendar as you'll want to spend all the time you can with all these characters. They have all great backstories, interesting conflicts, and makes you connect with them. But then there's the main plot. Like I said, the idea of reforming society has been done before in tales like Robin Hood, but here it's done so well. The balance of comedy, drama, and focus on mystery helps this to be a game that you don't want to put down. You want to see what happens next. There are specific sequences in this game that really hit you hard and make you to the point of just wanting to hug characters and what they are going through. The whole Futaba arc is one of the best RPG arcs I've seen in a long while. Really, when it comes to the actual story contents and its pacing, nothing feels out of place. Nothing feels forced in there. Everything is connected well, and players who pay attention will see connections throughout the story. But you're probably asking, okay, how did Persona 5 end up squeaking out the victory over Danganronpa V3? Well, my viewers, it is in fact the gameplay. Hold on, don't close the video yet, hear me out. The thing is, it's the connections of the actions of the story within your gameplay that ends up giving Persona 5 that extra edge due to the confidant system. Those relationships, that time you spent with certain people in the game and learning their individual stories and helping them out ends up feeling so much more satisfying when it actually bleeds into gameplay. The prime example of this is when leveling up a confidant so far to understand them and befriend them so well that they literally push you out of the way of death. That's how you get a story to be remembered. That's how you get a story to feel important in gameplay. And it's one of the many reasons why Persona 5 not only took the Story of the Year from me in 2017, but my Game of the Year as well. Anyway, that's it for my end of the year lists. Now, coming up next on the channel, to be honest, I'm not exactly sure. I've got an idea for a new series, and while it's going to take a little bit of time to actually put together, I really like the concept and idea, and I may need your help in order to do it, so I'll keep you guys informed. In addition, The Witch and the 100 Knight 2 is coming out at the end of the month. I did request review code on that, and considering that the first one is sorta my most popular video on this channel, yeah, I feel obligated to review it. Now granted, I don't know if I'm going to be able to get a review done at the launch date of the actual game, considering it's an RPG and I have the whole job thing this time around, but I will do my best. And I'll at least get something for the release date if I do get a review copy. But either way, I will be reviewing it. If you do have any recommendations in terms of games you want me to look at, leave them in the comment section below. In addition, once or twice a week, I will try to stream a new game that I haven't touched before so that you guys get a little bit more coverage on this channel. Also, expect a couple of sort of upkeep updates in terms of a video coming out in the next 2 weeks. I will be changing a couple things on this channel, but not necessarily that big of an update in terms of, flipping things on their head. You'll still get review coverage, you'll still get game design videos, it'll just be maybe a little bit different than you would expect. Anyway, this is Dragnix signing out, and I hope you got something out of this video, whether it be a new game to play or a new opinion that you never heard before. Anyway, I will see you next time, and as always, keep on gaming.